morning, everybody. Welcome to the day 2 of Belong Online Literature Fest. And we are ready to formally begin with the first panel for today. So, Online Literature Festival, or BOLF, is an initiative of Belong, a social venture that seeks to bring discrimination-free services and experiences to people who face identity-based discrimination. We run programs for inclusive housing, mental health, research, as well as a book club and library for inclusive literature. You can learn more about these on www.belong.net. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the tireless efforts of our festival partners, our media partner, The Wire, our cultural partner, the British Council, and our accessibility partner, Access for All, without whom this event would not be possible. Now, for today's session, this session is Diversity in Indian Publishing, Redrawing Our Shared Humanity with Bijal Vachharajani, Trisha Niyogi, and Urvashi Butalia. The session will be moderated by Rukmani Chawla Kumar. Rukmani is a consulting advisor to Belong Book Club and brings her long experience in publishing to the book club. She is also currently the consulting editor at Penguin India and has significant experience in themes of diversity and inclusion, including being involved in publishing books related to sexuality rights in India. That's all from me. Over to you, Rukmani.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the session on diversity in publishing. I'd like to introduce our fabulous panelists to you first. We have Urvashi Butalia. Urvashi is the director of Zuban Books, which publishes books on, for, by, and about women in South Asia. It was set up in 2003 as an imprint of India's first feminist publishing house, Kali for Women, which Urvashi co-founded. Urvashi has a long involvement in the women's movement in India and writes and publishes widely on issues related to women and gender. She's also the author of the award-winning The Other Side of Silence, Voices from the Partition of India, which has been one of the most influential books in South Asian studies. Welcome, Urvashi. Bijal Vachharajani is editor at Pratham Books. She's the author of 4 children's books called, I'm just going to read out the names of the books, A Cloud Called Bhura. So you want to know about the environment, What's Nima Eating Today, and The Seed Savers. She's written essays for Rohan Chakravarti's comic book, The Great Indian Nature Trail with Uncle Vicky. She's co-authored 10 Indian champions fighting to save the planet with Radha Rangarajan and contributed short stories for 2 anthologies, Frankenstein and Grandma's Tales. She writes about children's literature and sustainable development as a freelance journalist. Bijal is also the former editor of Time Out, Bengaluru. Hi, Bijal, and welcome to the panel. Trisha Niyogi is the Chief Operating Officer at Niyogi Books. Niyogi Books is one of the leading publishers of illustrated books in India. While Trisha has started new lists of fiction, non-fiction, translations, taking literature, art, architecture, history, and culture from India to the rest of the globe, she has also been acquiring content from around the world for Indian readership. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for participating in this panel on diversity in publishing. Now, this is a topic that is very close to my heart, A, because it's publishing and I work in publishing. Also, diversity and inclusion are vital themes for Belong. And as we look around the world today, it's becoming increasingly polarized. I mean, whether we're talking about race, gender, sexuality, caste, religion, the fault lines are everywhere and they're showing. And the difference between the self and the other has never been more apparent. Themes like diversity and inclusion are really, really crucial at a time like this in all the spaces we occupy as people. They're equally important in the literatures we read, write, and publish. Publishing, like other industries, holds up, a mirror to the times, reflecting the stories that are being lived in the world. But what I find fascinating about publishing is that it also has the power to mold public discourse, to shape public discourse. Now, Urvashi, on that note, I'd like to ask you what you think about the current state of Indian publishing, not just with the mainstream publishers, but also with independents such as yourself, such as Zuban. Can you just talk a little bit about what you see is happening today in India?
Yeah, thanks, Rukmini. Can I actually start by giving you a little historical perspective on Indian publishing? Given that I've been in this trade for like God knows how long. I started in the early 70s, so you can see from my gray hair. And you know, at that time, publishing used to be known as the gentleman's profession, which meant two things. One, that it was mostly men, and two, that those men were gentlemen. They were upper class, upper caste, all of those things. So there wasn't really any scope for being inclusive or being diverse. Nobody was really interested in it. Also, most of the businesses were family businesses, and they came down through the family who held power, and therefore you didn't see much diversity or inclusion. When I joined publishing in late 1972, the number of women in publishing could be counted perhaps on the fingers of two hands. You see a very, very different scenario today. You see it from our panel itself. So the publishing industry has never actually been particularly aware of or committed to diversity and inclusion. However, changes have happened along the way. And you pointed to independent publishers. Many of those changes have been brought about by the strong and courageous voices of independent publishers who have said, how can you not publish in this area? So the whole issue of translations in Indian publishing, not only into English, but translations between languages. It's the small independents who've had the courage to say this is an important area to look at. They've had to struggle. You look at Mini Krishnan in OUP struggling to keep alive a list of translations and eventually dies, but nevertheless, that space is opened up. Then you look at somebody like Yoda, you look at somebody like Navayana, you look at Leftward, I mean, you look at all the publishing houses, you look at Kalachuvadu, you look at DC Books. These are publishers who are saying, yeah, we've got something different to say. And they are bringing that in. So that brings in some diverse voices. People like Adivani who publish on tribal issues, Lit Panthers who publish on. So I think that is one thing that has been happening. But even so, the whole issue of diversity and inclusion is not only a matter of bringing in diverse content. It is something that should run much deeper. Mm-hmm. And we as feminist publishers, for example, have learned over the years. So, when we started publishing, we could say that we were being different, we were being diverse, we were going against the grain, we were publishing women's voices that had not had space. But which women were these? These are upper class, upper caste, English-speaking women. So how do we go beyond that in content? That was a challenge. So to seek out then other voices, you have to invest a lot of time, energy, and you have to change the way in your head you understand knowledge and literature and critical work. Because the way it comes to you from other areas is not how the canon has been set. Then you have to look at practices. Workplace practices. How diverse are you in those? So the challenges kind of continue. And it's not easy because if you just open up, we are discovering this, you just open up a job and you don't actually focus on the fact that you want to privilege people of a certain class, caste, whatever, religion, you will get all the mainstream people applying for the job. The others will not apply. And you have to therefore go that extra step and say, okay, in this job, we will only have it for DBA, we'll only have it for minorities, we'll only have it for tribal, we'll only have it for Northeast. And people don't actually bother to do that. So I think publishing, because of the practices of indie publishers, because of the practices of individuals within publishing, and because of the politics around us, is beginning to realize very late the importance of diversity and inclusion, but the steps to it are very difficult and not many people are taking them.
How do you see yourself at Zuban taking these steps actually? And, let's look at the last 15 years or so of Zuban sort of movement. What have you how did you start off when you started Zuban? Did you have this clear perspective in mind that this is what you were going to do? Or was it an organic process of inclusion as you went along?
A bit of both, Rukmini. We had a clear perspective, but like many people of privilege who have a clear perspective, you think because you are right, well-intentioned, it will happen of itself. And it did not, and that's what we realized. And I always tell this story of how one day a group of women arrived in Zuban, in the Kali office actually, and they brought with them a book made by rural women from Rajasthan on women's bodies. And they said to us, we want you to do this book. They told us the wonderful story behind it, that they had created it in a series of health workshops. And then the development program, which had commissioned the book, said they couldn't do it because it was pornographic, because it talked about sex. And so they brought it to us. And they said to us, we have 2 conditions for your publishing it. And we were excited to publish it. The conditions were, 1, that we would never sell a copy to a village woman at a profit. And 2, that 75 women had created this book, and all 75 names had to go on the cover as authors. And that, for me, was that light bulb moment which made me think that authorship, you have to think about it differently. So there are things like this which happened, which made us think differently. We realized that while we were publishing in English, we had to go beyond that. And therefore, we started seeking out books by women on the margins. We started bringing in inclusive practices in terms of age, sexuality, caste, class, all those things in a small office. It's easier to do, but it's also more challenging. And we started also seeking out people in different jobs who were not always upper caste. So it's all of those things have happened by a process of realizing how important it is to understand diversity deeply, and not only in terms of one set of identities, but several. So sexuality, age, class, caste, location, religion, all of these things come into it. And so you start off with a vision, but that's like a haze. I think I'm going to do this thing well. But when it actually comes to it, it's much more challenging. So we have been learning, and I have to say, I personally, as an old lady in publishing, have learned from my young colleagues, for whom this is a kind of natural thing, their awareness of their privilege. I don't know, somehow the young politics bring them this awareness in good ways and bad ways. And they've pushed me to understand this much better.
So it seems, Urvashi, that, over the years, you've actually really looked at, focused on, worked on aspects of diversity in, in the books that you've been publishing, in the authors that you've taken on board. I'm curious to know about your readers then. How were these books received? How were they and how are they being received in the market? Because that's finally, where it all goes. So what is the response that the market has given you to books like these?
So, obviously the response is not fantastic in terms of numbers. And that I don't think has to do with the intentionality of readers as much as it has to do with distribution practices and making books available, which are weighted against smaller publishers because bookshops don't have space and distributors are not interested in, small numbers and so on and so forth. On that count, the numbers are not great, except in some cases. But the readers are really fantastically committed and interested and invested. And there is, at least one of the things that's been really important for us is a sense of ownership that readers feel about our books. So they challenge us all the time. They write to us all the time when they think we've done something good. When we recently put out a job and said we want DBA candidates, we got people writing in and saying, why not Muslim candidates? So you do get that you get challenged by people, and I see that as a positive thing.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Urvashi. Bijal, I'd like to turn to you and ask you now, what is your experience at Pratham Books, where you spend your time and you work? How are you at Pratham, or how is Pratham looking at diversity and inclusion in publishing? Are you at all, in fact, doing that? How is it going over there? Can you talk a little bit about what the work you do?
Sure. Firstly, I just want to add that I'm a big fangirl of Zuban. Every time they have a sale is when I get a thappa from there. So thank you for what you do, Urvashi. I started my publishing journey actually as a journalist. I used to be the kids editor for Talent. And I used to get international books and Indian books at my table. And slowly I started realizing that there was a certain quality, like firstly, I didn't know there was such a range of children's books in India being published. And it was great to see that. But slowly I started feeling the sense of discomfort that a lot of it feels very homogeneous often.
Right.
And I started writing about that a little bit, interviewing publishers, talking to authors, illustrators, and also realizing more and more that it was the independent publishers who were really doing some cutting edge work when it came to representation, when it came to inclusion. And so when I got a chance to work at Pratham Books, I jumped at it because I was like, hey, someone's going to pay me to make books. But apart from that, someone's going to pay me to make the books that I had always thought I would like to make. And the wonderful thing about Pratham Books is that we're not dictated by sales figures. It's rather the needs of the field, because we work with early reader books. So we work with very with picture books or illustrated books. And so, which means that the sky's the limit for us when it comes to commissioning, when it comes to reaching out to a new community. For me, I think one of the light bulb moments was when we had we had Kanato who interned with us at Pratham Books. He's now an art director with us. And as part of his research project, he discovered that most Indian children's books about the Northeast, for instance, center around folk tales. And we were completely like, okay, we've got to change this. And so we've been working steadily towards making contemporary picture books set in the Northeast, for instance. And I think that, to me, just having that freedom to be able to reach out to writers and illustrators who can talk about their communities in a way that's not boxed in by, say, folk traditions or conflict, has been fairly liberating in that sense. So we've devised a few methods of doing this. It's not been the easiest, I must admit, because one is that commissioning often becomes like, who knows who, who's writing to you. So we worked on a workshop model where we reach out to different communities, and we actually go there, do a workshop over 2 or 3 days with participants, and get a bank of stories, and then we come back and work on them. So that's something that's really been wonderful. We went to Assam in 2019. My team went to Assam, worked in Tasteful with Green Hub. And it's we've got some fantastic stories about, not only just festivals, but walking in the wild, and just little observations about nature that have come from those books. Apart from that, we've also really tried hard to put own voices at the center of a lot of our commissioning, which means that we're trying to reach out to differently abled writers, also to Dalit writers and illustrators. Illustrators, the wealth out there is mind-boggling. Like, I think it's just something that has been fostered very quietly in this country, and suddenly you've got a range of illustrators you can work with. And so it's led to books that are very different, I would say. We've got wordless books that are set in the Northeast. We've got Kamla Bhasin's Azadi has been redone to represent all kinds of children. And I think that that's what I really enjoy doing. It makes me smile in all of this madness that's happening around us.
So it seems that you consciously and actively looking for reaching out to diverse voices to bring them into your children's books, which I think is absolutely fabulous. Because if you start with children's books, it couldn't get better. You expose children to all of that diversity, and that's how they are quote unquote educated, which I think is just marvelous. What are the other kinds of books that you have done, Bijal? I'm curious to know. Now you've talked about the Northeast, you've talked about just a range of diverse voices that you have included in your publishing. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? I'm very curious.
Can I show you my favorite book, one of my favorite books?
Absolutely.
So it's called Snip. It's wordless. It's by Kanato Jimo. Um, uh, it's very simple. It's about a pair of siblings who are at home, and oops, one day this is what they do.
Okay.
And what the fun that unravels in the household, and it's just the two of them at home, and then they decide to have fun with it, and then oops, the parents are home and are like, what have you done to yourself? And then they have a good laugh, and then it's the next day and they're back to mischief. And to me, this is such a great example of I know as a sibling, my sister snipped my hair off when I was a child. And so it's a very universal experience of being naughty when your parents are away, right? Or we have another book which has been written by a principal in Sikkim, and it's about a wobbly tooth. It's called The Very Wiggly Tooth. And Reshma's story is so universal because every child has those milk teeth falling out, and what do you do with them? So we wanted to center these stories in that universe, which is very, which reflects a child's reality, but it does not, again, it's the Northeast, so we must talk about farming and looms and songs and all only. It can be about just regular stories. Salil Chaturvedi wrote this wonderful book for us. It's a poetry picture book. It's called Then Is How I Like My Rain. And Salil's a differently abled writer. And then he wrote to us saying, would you like a book about a child in a wheelchair? And we, yes, please send it across. And, just that experience of working with Salil so closely, and the way he looks at the narrative as opposed to, say, an able person who's writing about the same experience, was just so intense and refreshing in many ways. Because firstly, as an editor, and I'm sure everyone will agree, you're constantly worried, am I getting this right? And here you're just like, everyone else is getting it right. I just need to put it all together.
That's very interesting. I'm just curious to know, since we are talking about such themes, have we in children's literature in India, have we started doing LGBTQ books yet, or is that something we still need to get to?
So actually, I remember when one of the first books on the subject came out. It was published by Duckbill. It's called Talking of Muskan by Himanjali Sankar. And right after that was Payal Dhar's Slightly Burnt, which was published by Bloomsbury. And as a journalist, I was like, this is amazing. I need to write about these books. Nina Sabnani was perhaps one of the first picture book artists to put different family structures in her book, which is published by Tulika Books. Mm-hmm. And so slowly you see it. In fact, I actually think children's publishing is very, very cool and bold in India. We have themes that we've got domestic abuse, we've got LGBT issues, we've got LGBT protagonists, we've got differently abled protagonists, which I think shows that children's book editors are thinking that let's try and think outside the box. We've tried to commission a few. More recently, we worked with Aarti Parthasarathy and Rai with a book called I Want to Ride a Motorbike, and it's about a girl who wants to ride a motorbike, and it's art directed by Oindri. So to get a whole, to work with such diverse people was a very fascinating experience. And Tulika Books has just come out with Kanak Shashi's Gutli Has Wings. And another really beautiful book about a child wanting to fit in, about the child's identity. So I think identity is something that children's books are looking at, especially because that's the age when children start looking closely at who they are. And who's better than children's books to help you lay that foundation?
That sounds absolutely wonderful. But with children's books, I'm curious because for the most part, it's the parent who buys the books for the kid, right? So how are parents receiving these books that all of you are publishing?
So honestly, the wonderful thing about Pratham Books is that we bypass a lot of this because our books go to government institutions and libraries, and a lot of times children pick up what they want, or librarians who are fairly um, smart and articulate, who know how to pick books for children, curate these. But mainstream wise, you see that as an issue. I know for a fact that at book fairs, editor friends have discussed that how parents will walk by a cover with a differently abled protagonist and not pick it up, saying, "But my child doesn't need to read this." So there is a lot of parent keeping that happens in that sense. But we've realized that once the book gets in the child's hand, the children love it.
Yeah. So it's
Rukmini, it's Urvashi. Can I tell you a little story about this question you were asking?
absolutely, Urvashi. Go ahead, please.
No, we did a book a while ago called My Little Body Book, which is really sex education for little kids.
Yeah.
And at one of the World Book Fairs, on the last day, we were wrapping up or about to wrap up the stall when two parents and a child came along to the stall. And the parents were browsing, and the child picked up this book, which is lying at a lower level so that she could reach it. And she read through the whole thing. I mean, it's not got many words. And then she tucked it under her arm and waited for the parents to finish. And when they'd finished, she wanted them to take it. She was walking off, and they said, "No, no, you can't." And they took it back from her, and then she wanted them to buy it. And they absolutely refused to let her buy it. At first, I thought it was about money. The book is only $1.95 or something. And I said to them, "Listen, I'll give it to you at half price. She really wants it." But I realized, because they almost became violent with the child, and they snatched it out of her hands eventually, and she was howling, and they went away, that it was not about money, but it was about the. So your question about parents being reluctant to buy for the kids, and Bijal's answer to that, I just thought this might add to it.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing, because, as a parent myself, I wish, my daughter is now 13, so I would have liked to have found many more of these books when she was little. And I didn't, maybe I wasn't looking in the right place, or I didn't find them at that time. But sure, as a parent, if I had found them, I would want to put these wonderful books that the kind of book you've described, Urvashi, and that Bijal's talked about, into my child's hands, because I mean, what else do? You want your child to know about the world that exists, and everyone is a part of the same world. So I think these are very beautiful books and all steps in the right direction. And I think I sort of let my child loose in the bookstore, and she picks up her own books. So I think if parents can kind of do that and not quite look at the covers and just pay for them and take the kids away, then the kids should be fine. Trisha, I'd like to turn to you now and ask you about the work you do at Niyogi, and how, are you looking at diversity in publishing in any sort of conscious way? Are you focusing on that? Or is it something that is happening, or is it, how does it work for you at Niyogi in terms of the books that you acquire and commission?
So the thing is that we started publishing as publishing illustrated books, high-end, huge, good research and everything. And they're most of the time wrongly actually referred to as profitable books. They're not profitable books. But over the years, we have consciously and many times exclusively published books which falls under the ambit of inclusive publishing. Now, when we talk about illustrated books, it comes to our mind that it's mostly on art, architecture, culture, history, heritage, travel, and things like that. But while publishing these books, we also felt that we have to be inclusive. And so we started the process. Now, it started at a very small pace. We started taking baby steps. And one of the first books that we published was titled as The Light Within. Now, I have the copy of the book. I'll show you why is it special to me, because this was the beginning of my journey in inclusive publishing, which I thought could be inclusive publishing. Now, this is, it's titled as The Light Within, a different vision of life. It was written by a photojournalist called Shifra Das, and it celebrates the stories of visually impaired people who've actually gained success in the terms of satisfaction, also in the terms of how they are now in the society. For example, there's a story of this girl called Sangeeta. She's from Muzaffarpur, Bihar. She is visionless, and she's a daughter of an iron trader. Now she is in Bihar. She's there. She's running an NGO to help the poor in the surrounding areas. At the same time, she has a residential school for the visually impaired. Now, these are stories which we need to say, we need to tell the world so that we don't see them with the eye of a pity and sympathy. Rather than it is awe and empathy that how we need to see them. And this consciousness of empathy is something which started perhaps then. Of course, it was there, but actually translating into action is something which started perhaps then. And there on, we started doing a lot of work in this field, which I'll elaborate. But I just want to say, take up from what Urvashi just said, that our generation is perhaps blessed to have, I have known people like Urvashi and many other people who've been a role model for all of us. So what when we start our journeys in publishing, we are already aware of these things happening, and which is a benefit and a boon for a lot of us. So then we started publishing fiction and translations very heavily, and non-illustrated non-fiction titles. We've also started publishing in Hindi illustrated. So in all these imprints that we do, we try and get in these books like the one we have just published. It's an Atmakatha or an autobiography. It is a translation from Kannada of writer and activist Lakshman. It's called Shamboli. Shamboli in Kannada means beware. Now, whenever they were manual scavengers, and when they were on the street, they used to shout out Shamboli, beware, so that the upper caste people don't come in contact with them, and they're aware, then they stay away from them. Now, he was from one of the lowest of lowest castes in Karnataka, and the struggles and the different discrimination that went through comes through, and the fact that he's come out of it and he's now celebrated. He's no more, but he's celebrated as a writer and a social activist. The thing that the people have accepted him, that's a success story that is not common, but yet that is something we need to have more people like that going forward. Apart from that, we also focus on a lot of voices. For example, Tibetan fiction. Now, when we spoke about Tibetan fiction, we are mostly, I was aware of only poetry and Buddhism and spirituality. But when this manuscript, I started working on this manuscript. It's a book called White Crane Lend Me Your Wings. It's by Sevang Yishe Pemba, who's supposed to be the founding father of Tibetan English writing. Now, this book is a marvelous book, even though it talks about the Tibetans' fight against the occupation and the discrimination, everything. The unique point about this book is it's not violent, or it doesn't talk in that sense. Mm-hmm. It tries to justify every motive by any side possible. And this is done exceptionally well. One of the books that I feel is very close to my heart. This is done exceptionally well in the market. It is done better in the international market than in India though, but it's still picking up. So it's been 2 years since we published this, 2.5 years, and it's still going strong. So we understand there's a tapering of sales after a point of time, but I don't see this happening for this book. Many times there are boosts and there are booms, and then again, somehow it's all about seasonality, or however people get to know about these books, they start selling more. So I think some of these books are classic in nature, and I'm sure they're not going to die out because people are not reading. I think more people are reading right now. Apart from that, we have stories of repressed and suppressed voices and immigrants. Then, for example, we have done a book called Barbed by a Fence, and it talks about its stories about immigrants, written by immigrants, and they've been translated from Assamese and then into English. Now, similarly, we've done a lot of them. Still, they're not enough. I strongly suggest that that's never enough. And we've also done a lot of women voices. That's very important. We've also done books that men take the male take understanding of women. For example, we have a book called Preeto, Male Gaze in Urdu Literature. Now, we've also, I think that's a part of this literature festival as well. But we try and understand both the sides and then go forward with the publishing of these books. Now, Northeast, so I went to Imphal and I've been to Northeast several times just to search for books and voices over the last 2 years. And they're amazing, amazing voices. Somehow they're just not coming through. When it comes to publishing, they don't come forward to us. I wish I had more submissions from them. But when I was not getting enough submissions, we actually went to these places in search for books and voices. So we are trying our best to actually come together at a point where this inclusive publishing is a norm. It becomes a norm. We need not be positioned as just illustrated publishers, commercial subjects or things like that. But then these are also this can be. I just don't understand the meaning of commercial, because a good literature can also be commercial. But we don't want to be pocket into a certain kind of publisher. We want to be an inclusive publisher. And this ideology, perhaps, is what I'm trying to do, should reflect in every book we plan. Not just books from marginalized voices or things, but every book should have that sensitivity flowing through them. For example, what I try to do when we publish the book, we try to do, is when we publish the book called Kathakali, on Kathakali, which is predominantly a very male dance form. It was started by me. We had to make sure that there is a chapter on women contributors, from Kathayani to so many more people, have actually revolutionized how Kathakali is performed today, and they're breaking glass ceilings. So the sensitivity should flow in each and every book. And that comes from a very diverse and inclusive environment to work. We are constantly trying to have a very inclusive and diverse work culture from different places, from different backgrounds, with different abilities, so that we can get the best out of everything, because we always learn from each other. Nobody. So I feel we are not perfect, but there is something to learn from everyone.
Thank you, Trisha. Thanks for that. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of good work. In fact, all three of you, Urvashi, Bijal, Trisha, as independents, as the sort of units that you are doing clearly a lot of work in diversity. Urvashi, I have a question for you. I'm curious about the big mainstream publishers, as opposed to the independents such as yourself, the mainstream publishers in India. How do you see them working with these themes on diversity and inclusion? Are they sort of actively participating, not just in terms of the content that they bring out, but also in terms of human resources, the people they employ, etc.? Or are they not quite where you would like them to be? Can you give me a sense of the mainstream publishers in India, please, Urvashi?
I think there's always a lot that remains to be done. And if you look at some of the indicators within publishing, you will find that you don't see a very diverse picture. So for example, even if I talked earlier about so many women in publishing, but even if you look at those women, how many of those women are Dalit, how many are from the Northeast, how many don't come from upper middle class households. I mean, you look at our panel, we're talking about diversity, but it's not a very diverse panel. So in that sense, those things are pretty evident. But also, I think what happens is that many of the larger publishers, especially those in the English language, which are subsidiaries or fully foreign-owned companies, they are also dictated by the guidelines of their parent offices. So they may have certain things that push them into looking actively at diversity and inclusion. So there may be some practices there. But I think also the fact that the motivation there is really profit makes it very difficult even for editors and other colleagues who may be fantastically inclusive in their thinking to bring in the kind of lists that they would like to. So that becomes a little bit difficult. Yeah. Sorry, somebody was at my door. That becomes a little bit difficult. So I think it's a very mixed scene. I think it'll only become evident when, the seriousness or the depth of the change, if there is any, will only become evident when we see it in the lists, in the hiring practices, in the management, and in the boards. And that's not there yet.
We have a while to go before that happens. Is that right, Urvashi? Because I can see the advantages that the independents have, that or like people like you are being able to do, because you are sort of independents, you're smaller, you take your own decisions, and it's much tougher when we are commissioning in a mainstream publishing house, because it's always about, I think as Trisha pointed out, it's always about the bottom line is the money. Is it how is it going to sell? If it's not going to sell, no matter how fantastic the book is, and all of us commissioning editors go through this the whole time. So there's so much that one wants to do just in terms of the content one is producing. Never mind who HR is. HR is employed, so that's a different problem altogether. But just in terms of the content, it is a constant struggle because you've got to sell. We're told that, okay, if you have a bestseller on your hands, then you can sort of, commission a couple of books that you want and all of that. So that's how we have to juggle things, because the bottom line is always about the money. So I think these challenges are going to be with us in India for a while. But where do you see things sort of changing? I mean, is it going to come from the readership? Are the readers in India going to sort of demand different books? Is the push going to come from there? Is it going to, how do we see this situation changing? Because at the moment, it seems like we seem to be stuck somewhere, especially where the mainstream publishers are concerned. Where will the change come from? Because it needs to come.
I think, one caution is that the independent publishers, while they can do certain things, they still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go. So we shouldn't really be patting ourselves on the back and saying we're doing it and the biggies are not. But I think we should be saying, yes, it's in some ways we can do certain things that the biggies can't do, but even that's not really enough. I think where will the change come from? It's like a chicken and egg situation, because the media will always say we give the public what they want and the public want lifestyle. That's a load of nonsense, because nobody's ever tried to find out what the public actually wants. And now with the internet, it has become much easier for publishers like us and bigger publishers to actually get some kind of a barometer on what people want to read. And what people want to read is more of the same, and yet new stuff and different and diverse and political and all of that. But in order for that to enter our publishing in any substantial way, there has to be the political will in the leadership to make that change. So I think it's 6 of this and half a dozen of the other. And until the two come together to make the full dozen, I don't think we'll get that much change. But there's always somebody who is able to slip through and make a little change. And I think that really needs to be appreciated. So editors who will fight their way through in big houses and bring in interesting books, we have to appreciate that.
Yeah. So every bit counts, basically, is what you're saying. And it's going to take time for things to change.
Look at a publisher like Tara. They are so off the wall. They do what they want. They started with kids' books. Now they're doing all kinds of things. And because they have made a space for themselves, small as they are, those books cannot be ignored. And now those books are setting an example for the big publishers to see, maybe we got it wrong. It's like when we started to do women's books, everybody thought, what the hell are they doing? And then after a while, the big publishers thought, wow, there's something there. Now everybody's doing it. So in a sense that, we've moved one step forward. That it's no longer that marginal, but now we need to unpack the category woman and do more within that. So there's always a next step.
I would just like to add.
Yeah, sure, Trisha.
Yeah, so it is true that the readership is changing, and initiatives like this is going to help furthermore to change the situation. But at the same time, I would like to say that inclusive publishing has like economic morality and sustainable growth fall into a category of things which we all principally agree with. But I'm worried that the cost might be more than we are willing to bear. But there are certain publishers, I would like to take a few case study examples, which are really prominent and visible in terms of sales, in terms of acceptability, in terms of the impact they've had. The first one, which I read when I was like in class 10th or something, class 12th or something, it was the autobiography of the sex worker by Nalini Jamila, which was originally published in Malayalam and then translated into English by Westland. It was published in Malayalam by DC Books. Now, this book did not titillate or provide a very voyeuristic delight to the readers, but it sold well. It had an impact. Now, the second book that I wanted to talk about, it's all these things may accrue in this way, say the publication of Annihilation of Caste, published as an independent volume with a scholarly introduction. It was thought of by a publisher, Navayana. They included it in the publishing ethos and can be taken as a brilliant case study for inclusive publishing activities. On one hand, it provoked intellectual thought. On the other hand, it did well and benefited the entire publishing fraternity, not just the house. It's the content we are looking at that sells also. How we do it is a thing. Yet another book, which is one of my favorite books, is The Life Less Ordinary by Baby Hadar. It was written in Hindi originally and translated into English by none other than Urvashi Butalia. Now, this is a book, it's a great case study to understand how the benefits are much greater than the revenue to the publisher. Now, the money which was made out of it, I'm sure she will be able to say a lot more about it, made out of domestic sales, as well as the sale of translation rights, international, national, and domestic, helped the author also earn more to foray into other lines of work and also established her as an author. Now, that is truly inspirational, and that is the very quantifiable benefits that we are able to see in front of ourselves. So the basic crux is that I think, at the risk of sounding business-like, I think one of the benefits of inclusive publishing is that I confess that it's the variety we're looking at. If more different publishers are publishing this kind of literature in different languages in different regions, there is going to be a positive development, because people will now be able to choose what to read, when to read, and how to read. Now, yes, it's a cyclical thing. It's how the readers behave and how the publishers, the supply-demand game that happens. But then there is a pulse. There is a pulse of readership which we're trying to gauge every day. And as ma'am said, that it's internet has helped us quite a bit. But I think we need to spend more time also at the point of sale and understand the buying patterns, how they are doing it. And it's just not for the salespeople. Perhaps as editors also, we need to be there and see how they choose their books and how to change the psychology of actually purchase. I think that is somewhere we need to work much more on. That is what I'm working on each day, trying to understand how to reach out and perhaps even change the choice through just content, no persuasion, just through content that we publish.
So I think that makes a lot of sense, and especially what you said about sales. Thank you for everything that you voiced, and also the bit about sales. Yes, working with sales, I think, makes a lot of difference wherever you are. I have a question for Urvashi and for Bijal. Urvashi, Bijal, you are both not just people who work in publishing, but you're also writers. How do you, work with these themes that we're talking about in publishing? How do you, when you're writing, who are you? What are you writing about? Urvashi, your book on partition, for example, looks at, the marginalized, looks at people on the margins, women, children, the untouchables, the lower castes, all of these people and how they were affected by the partition, for instance. Was that a conscious thing that you did? Was that deliberate? When you're writing, and I believe you're writing a book on a trans person right now, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure about that, but maybe you can fill us in. So where are you when you're a writer? Who are you?
I think I am basically this nervous ball of all my experiences, but also I've realized over time it's a lot about the people I meet and the things that I've got to do. And I write a lot about the environment, and that's a topic that's never really talked about in mainstream. It's always shelved into non-fiction, and we'll be talking about saving the planet and things like that. But there's very little conversation about actually how how environment is weaved into everything that we do or write or say. So for me, it's that I'm constantly bringing to the forefront. I also realize that I've been very much influenced by the people I have worked alongside, the children I talk to constantly, and all of that goes into my books. Like A Cloud Called Bura actually has a character, Tammy, who wasn't there in the first draft, but I went back and wrote the entire book from her perspective, and then I mixed the two drafts. And Tammy is an Ambedkarite, and she's modeled around my late partner in many ways, because she's somebody who's asked questions, who's also constantly just like, you privileged people, you don't know what is happening actually when climate change is happening in the city. So for me, a lot of it becomes what I see and what I think I want to tell. The problem also, of course, happens that as an editor, you're constantly telling yourself, are you sure this is what you want to put in? So sometimes I have to tell myself to shut up about those things. But definitely a lot goes to the people I've met, the work I've been able to do, rescuing animals, meeting environmentalists, conservationists across the world. It's just been, it just all gets dumped into my stories.
So you have a lot of space. I mean, you're not just an editor, but you're a writer as well. So you pretty much, you have the freedom and the flexibility to be able to develop the stories and bring out the voices that you feel need to come out, which I think is a very empowering space.
It is, and I hope I can do justice to it, because just yesterday I was having a conversation with some students of Nalanda Academy in Varda. And one of the things that it just constantly comes back to me as to how empowering writing is, and how privileged that we are in a space that we can actually publish what we think, and there are readers for what we say. And sometimes just the sheer weight of that is a little daunting to me.
No, I think actually it's a terrific place to be in, and thank you for sort of being where you are and doing what you're doing. I'm curious, Bijal, is there another book on the way? Is there something that you're working on right now? Anything you'd like to share with us?
I'm currently so I've written a book about, it's called That Night. It's illustrated by Shrujana Sridhar, who's a Dalit feminist activist. And it's about the polarizing climate we live in, and it's from the perspective of a child who is just observing a riot unfold in the middle of the night, and she can't make sense of it.
Wow.
Apart from that, I'm trying to write something about grief and climate change, as to how, along with personal griefs, how climate change tends to amplify what we are losing. So that's my next project.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And what is the age group that you're writing for? Are these picture books for younger kids, or are they also for older kids?
So that night is a picture book. So it will be for around 6-7-year-olds. And the other one will be most probably young adults. The protagonist, Sabi, who is named after Savitri by her dead father, and she's very upset about it, is around 12 and a half. So that's the age group.
I'd like to go back to being a child again, because I just only seem to remember Enid Blyton from my childhood. And I mean, I was just so little that was there. And I think at that time we were very grateful for what we had. But I think children's publishing in India at this point is in a marvelous place. And I think you're going in the right direction. So I'm looking forward to these books of yours coming out as well, Bijal. Good luck with them.
Thank you, Rukmini.
Urvashi, can I turn that question back to you as a writer?
Yeah, thank you. So, Rukmini, I love writing, but I don't do enough of it, because really the path I've chosen in my life is publishing. And I have an obligation to all my writers to look at their work before I take off on my own writing, which is why I take 20 years to write a book. So I often say I'm like a one book wonder. I mean, I'll write little things in between. And I find, when I come to writing, I know that I have to do it, and then I'll do everything else so that to avoid the writing. But finally, I come around to doing it. But my writing and publishing are very interlinked. They are both shaped by what I call their parent, which is my feminism. So I have cut my political teeth in the feminist movement in India in the 70s. And I've learned a lot in that movement about solidarity, about the necessity of listening, about respecting people, but also about being alert to the challenges thrown from within. So for example, the feminist movement was strongly challenged by activists who talked about sexuality and how the question of sexuality was ignored within what they call the mainstream movement. Similarly, it has received challenges from disability rights groups, from Dalit groups, from tribal women, from women of minority identities. And always the movement or people in the movement have had to ask themselves this question, that does the awareness of one kind of inequality or hierarchy mean that you can stop there? Or must you then be alert to all the other hierarchies that are hidden under that one? So when I said earlier, unpack the category woman, that we are women and women are oppressed and discriminated against and all of those things. But are all women equally oppressed and discriminated? No. A Dalit woman will face that oppression and discrimination very differently from what I will, and so on. So this awareness, this prism which the feminist movement gave me, informs a lot of my writing. So when I did that book on partition, I was very alert to looking at the experiences of women, which is what I wanted to do. But when I talk about hierarchies of knowledge, it had never struck me when I was doing that book, that hidden under the experiences of women, there would be the experiences of Dalits. And I came upon the Dalit experience purely by accident in one of my interviews, when a woman said to me, we didn't face any violence either from the Hindus or the Muslims because we are Dalit, we are not Hindu or Muslim. And to me, that was like, there's a different experience here, which I need to understand. And that opened that window for me. So what I mean is that the question of recognizing inclusivity or looking at diversity, there isn't a moment when you can say it's done, I've done it. Every time, it's like an onion, you start looking and then you peel it, there's another layer, you have to understand that. So that informs our work in Zuban. That's what we try to do, and that informs my writing. And so the two are always interlinked. I saw a question in the question box from your team saying, if I had not been running Zuban, would my writing have been any different? I think maybe, but maybe not, because it comes from what I've learned in the feminist movement, which is what I've tried to implement also in Zuban. And yet I'm so grateful to what I've learned in Zuban, because that does inform my writing in very deep ways.
Yes, yes. Okay, thanks very much for that, Urvashi. Trisha, Bijal. We've got a bunch of audience questions to take now, so let me just take those up. for us. There's a question from Rana who asks, what is it that makes you hopeful about the future of publishing in India? This is for all panelists. Okay.
I'm hopeful, one, because I think Indians have a hunger for knowledge. And even though a lot of political brakes are being put on that hunger and it's being tried to be directed to in one direction, I don't think that that's going to happen in the long run. So I think there's that. I think that we have a long way to go in education, and books are still the cheapest and most accessible means. And I think despite the fact that publishing is a nonsensical industry in terms of money. And I mean, if you saw the economy of publishing, you would wonder why anyone ever
Anyone does it.
And it makes me so angry when, sorry Rukmini, big publishers give huge advances which are never earned back, but which destroy the whole scene for us. But if you look at the commitment of people who continuously enter this industry and bring with it a desire and a need to change, I think there's survival written large on that. And of course, it may not survive in the form of books, but the curating, collecting knowledge and disseminating it, that will never go away. So that's publishing in its big sense.
Thank you.
I would like to add to that.
Sure.
Generosity and passion is at the very heart of publishing. That is actually evident in how we tell the stories, how we do it through art and things through our books. Now, that is something which I don't see dying at all. People, everybody in this industry and all the stakeholders, I'm not just talking about publishers, but every stakeholder, even bookstores, the new bookstores which are coming in, they're very passionate about the books. And this passion is something that something that is good to see. That's what drives me also. As for publishing, I think there are huge challenges. As said, there is a lot of integration, a lot of collaboration, which is possible with the internet and curation, as ma'am said, that curation and how we present it in a very unique way. It's going to be interesting. So with challenges comes a lot of interesting times. And that is perhaps directs towards a positive future of Indian publishing.
Thank you. Thank you, Trisha. Bijal, do you want to respond to that? Or
quickly, I want to add that over the last 3 months, when none of us have actually been seeing sales in the way we are used to, Pratham Books opened its content a few years ago. All our books are under Creative Commons. And I think one of the things that we've seen is that we've been able to get books to children who cannot leave their houses. And to me, the collaborations that have come out of it, the community library project in Delhi, taking these stories and turning them into personalized videos to send to their 2,000 members via WhatsApp. Children in Italy under quarantine reading books because they cannot step out. I think one of the things that we're going to hopefully see is that maybe publishers will come together to find out better ways of getting books to the readers in a more equitable way. That's something that really comes out of this time.
Thank you for that feedback. I think that's very valuable. Thank you all for your responses. The next question is by someone who wants to stay anonymous. Speaking of diversity in political views, how is the industry responding to the current government's divisive policies? Is politically nuanced work being encouraged received?
So I have a question to that questioner. If they're asking a politically charged question, why do they want to remain anonymous?
Good point. Maybe we'll wait for the response to come along in this Q&A box and perhaps move to the next question. Or does anyone want to respond to anonymous attendee?
Let's go to the next question.
We'll move on to the next question.
Let me respond to it, Rukmini, just a little bit. Just to say that like every other industry, publishing is also subject to a lot of, within quotes, policing, although there is no censorship in theory, and we have certain guidelines that we have to abide by, which have to do with things like obscenity and defamation and so on and so forth. But many publishers now take legal advice on what can be published and what not, because of precisely the kind of situation that you have mentioned. And this does mean that certain kinds of things don't get published because there is advice not to publish it, or there is fear not to publish it. Some of the publishers do publish difficult stuff. I mean, one of the areas in which we work quite strongly is Kashmir, and every book we publish is very political. And we run the danger of being, facing the consequences of that. And I can't say that tomorrow we might decide not to do it precisely because of that danger. Because now the considerations for us are not only the content, but also that if you are arbitrarily shut down or something, there are a number of jobs at stake. So the situation does create these kind of dilemmas for publishing, and I think we need to understand where they're coming from and not dismiss them.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Urvashi. The next question is by Ananya, who is asking about piracy. How are you battling piracy? How do you think the intent to make marginalized voices heard is hindered by the piracy that happens?
All our content is open source. Do what you will, read it for free, translate it, take it to whoever you want. So for us, that's not even a question in that sense. So.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, they don't want to pirate our kind of books anyway. They want to pirate Chetan Bhagat, So who's going to pirate Baby Haldar? No.
Yeah, so I think your books are safe, basically, Urvashi. Okay, there's a question from Ariba to you, Urvashi. Based on your experiences, do you think publishers like Zuban will come up in the future for inclusion of diverse voices, for example, from LGBTQIA+? How do you think publishers these days can improve to create such a space? That's for you, Urvashi.
Well, I think in the early days, there were very few publishers doing books on sexuality and sexual identities. One of the first ones to start that was Yoda. But now there are a number of publishers who do publish, including Zuban, and there is also a press called Queer Ink Press based in Bombay, which started as an online bookstore, but which now also does some publications. And there are people who do their own self-published books as well. I think that in terms of the specific question to Zuban, we're already doing LGBTQI or queer titles. Mm-hmm. And we have been for a while. And in terms of whether this will become an important voice in publishing, I think yes, because I think it is an important voice in the politics outside publishing. It's people are, more and more people are coming up, writing, speaking, etc. And I think those voices have to enter the entire queer spectrum. They have to enter the world of publishing.
Rishi, on that note, I'm going to jump in. I'm so sorry. I have one question to ask of all of you. The recent judgments that the Supreme Court has brought out, the trans bill striking down of Section 377. Do you think that these recent judgments are going to impact or have already started impacting the kind of publishing that, the kind of books that publishers are bringing out?
The things that, of course, it has. It's always a cyclical thing. What is happening, as I said, everything under the sun which is happening in our country or the world is at the gamut of publishing, can come under publishing. So with this happening, the people are opening up. With whatever is happening right now, more and more people are gravitating towards even LGBTQ literature. Not just reading, but more people are actually writing also. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, as you see, just a few of my contemporaries, few of my friends have just written some books on LGBTQ. Even I have published 3 books on LGBTQ. And as a matter of fact, there's a Malayalam book called Invisible Walls that was written by Chandrika Balan. That's about lesbians. And it was, I think, in 2007 or 8. It was originally written in 2007 or 8. So even before the judgments which are now being passed, there were literature written then also. So that is happening, and of course it will have an impact on what we publish today, because we have to catch hold of the pulse of the readership.
Correct.
We have to stay relevant. We have to do that. Otherwise, publishing is going to have a lot of problems. In short, publishing should represent how we want the world to look at, or it looks like, and that's the basic thing.
Thank you. Thanks, Trisha. The next question is by Sharija Menon. How does one emphasize the importance and process of inculcating reading habits in a child early on? Parents suddenly expect the child to start reading when they're prepping for their competitive exams and are required to read, an act that many individuals then see as a task rather than an enjoyable process of discovering new worlds, concepts, and their own selves.
I think there are many ways. Firstly, I'm going to start by saying that a lot of parents who say, oh, my child is not a reader, are also not readers. So, hey, reading starts at home. You've got to be a reader to inculcate the reading habit in your child. There's this really fantastic book by Daniel Penyak. It's called The Rights of a Reader. It's also a poster if you all have seen it. And one of the things that the author writes is about how reading with a child is perhaps one of the most important ways of fostering a reading habit. And a lot of parents also let go of that habit early. Like, by the time when they become independent readers, they just stop reading with the child, leaving the child to navigate, complexities sometimes alone. So read with the child for as long as the child wants you to read with them. Give them lots of books. Yeah, give them all kinds of books. If your child's reading a book that you don't love, doesn't matter, bring other books so that your child has choice. And be part of the journey, have discussions. I do that with a lot of young kids and they all think I'm very cool because I read the same books as them.
I think when we're talking about inclusion, that is a big thing where parents are concerned. It's like the story Urvashi shared earlier. There are all kinds of books that are now there for children. Don't stop them, even if you think that, oh, my child is not gay, but she's reading an LGBTQ book. That's okay, or whatever it is. A book about a Dalit child, about whatever it is. So I think to just, as parents, give children the freedom to read, like you said, whatever they want to read would make a huge difference. So that inclusion comes to a large extent from the reader. And in this case, we're talking about parents.
You know how in farming, there's that whole seed bombing thing where you make seed bombs and you plant them. So this is what I do. I buy the books I want children to read and I keep gifting them and forcing them onto them. So do that.
Thank you. There's a question by Kajal. There is a dearth of information and knowledge on how someone who wants to work in publishing from a beginner's level. How would you suggest one goes about beginning to work in publishing, especially in smaller cities where there is a scarcity of options?
No, I think it's quite difficult to get an entry into publishing. A lot of it is, who you know, hearsay, friends and such like. A lot of it is family. So it's quite difficult. And there are hardly any training courses around. There used to be some, but now I think the National Book Trust runs one occasionally. And the other good training course is the one run by Seagull. But in some universities, they have a few workshops as well, like Ambedkar and Ashoka and other places. But it's quite difficult. You have to keep a lookout on their websites for any job ads. And then you have to apply. And if you don't have any experience, then starting salaries are very, very low, but they'll give you certain kinds of tests and then you'll have to see what you can pick up, but it's not that easy. And it's even less easy if you're in smaller cities because the publishing industry is centered mainly in the metros. So if it is Malayalam, it is centered in Kottayam or Thiruvananthapuram. If it is Hindi, it is centered in Delhi mostly. If it's Bangla, it's in Kolkata. So, you don't, it's not easy to work from smaller cities. But now maybe the lockdown will help in this, that people are getting much more used to remote working. So it may be possible, if no matter where your location, to actually find jobs and work remotely.
Thank you for that response. There's a question by Alex Washington. What type of writers is India looking for? How can everyday people do to help you all find new voices?
All types. I mean, This country is such a rich country in terms of writing and literature and languages.
And we're talking about inclusion. So, I mean, the more voices there are, the better we are for it. The variety of voices, the diversity of voices.
And how can a normal people help? I think I just missed the question.
Yeah.
It's by reading and sharing the joy of reading that book and gifting books. If 10 people do that, at least there will be a cascading effect. If everybody does that, that's going to make the change. It's a very simple task, actually.
That's so true. That's so true. And I can see your joy. I mean, Trisha, when you're talking about books, I mean, I can see the joy is so evident on your face.
I'll give you a personal example. When this book, it's from the voices from Manipur. Urvashi ma'am, you published it. The Manipur stories, the stories from Manipur.
The many that I am, crafting the word. Crafting
the word.
Yeah.
So before it came out, when it was being launched, I was in Imphal and I got to know about this book. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend the launch because I had some decided things. But then when I came back, even before the book was out in the market, I wanted to buy that book. So I wrote to your Instagram page, please tell me. They directed to me to your website and I bought the book from there. I bought around, and then from Bharisan. So I bought like 5-6 books and I actually gifted them to my people on their weddings also because they are readers and they are loving it. So they are reading stuff, of course. They won't read just after their marriage, but they're reading it and they come back to me and says, I bought 2 more books. I'm going to gift it to them. So that's the thing. It just has to snowball on itself. You have to take the book that you connect with and just spread the word about it. That's it.
So we are doing one on Arunachal now. I'll tell you so you can buy 6 copies of that.
Absolutely. Nagaland is my favorite, by the way.
Nagaland is favorite also.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know this because I went there to look for books like this and I was like, uh-oh. So, yes.
Thank you. We've got our last question by Mangala Dilip. How does a writer who comes from privilege give voice to underrepresented communities without appropriating? Can it be done at all?
I'll just add to that. There is whenever the moment we talk about documenting, researching and writing books which are by a different people who do not actually belong to that community, there is a question of authenticity and sensitivity of the voice. So every publisher needs to have that authenticity and sensitivity check, which is a must do. We cannot disseminate wrong information, false information in name of inclusive publishing. So that is one thing that can be done. It can be checked and still be published, but a huge amount of sensitivity and authenticity checks need to be done before we do that. Of course, if you have a workforce which is from a diverse background, it is easier to do so. But then at the same time, we always have peer reviews, we have subject matter specialists, and they're ready to help if you reach out to them.
Rukmini, may I add to that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Mangala, thank you for that question. I think it's a very difficult one to answer really, and Trisha has given part of the answer. I think really what's important for us, and I can only speak for ourselves, is that it must be the community that speaks for itself to begin with as a first, and appropriation is a real danger. But I think that one can't also in black and white terms say only like must speak for like, because then you kind of paint yourself into a corner. So I think it's important to understand the politics where this is coming from and the need for, so if upper class people started speaking for Dalit people, I think that would be a mistake. But I think that there is a point in time when after the Dalit voices have been have found amplification, articulation, etc., it's very important to make space for that. Then you may talk of the possibility of speaking sensitively on behalf of without appropriating. I think that's the important thing. But to me, the first voices must always come from within.
Yeah. Okay. Urvashi, Bijal, Trisha, thank you very, very much for joining us on this panel today. I think it's been a lovely discussion. I could have kept you here for more questions, but we're going to be kicked off, I fear. So thanks very much for joining in today. Thank you for your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Rukmini.
Thank you.
Thank you, Belong.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rukmini.
Thank
That was a wonderful panel.